Hello everyone, my name is Carly. Welcome to my consequences presentation. Today I will be talking about some of the people who opposed slavery of the indigenous and African people from the first contact in the North Atlantic slave trade. I want to define and understand their reasonings behind their opposition. Did it come from an economic standpoint? Was it because religious reasons, or was it just because it was plain wrong and inhumane? The first person I'm going to talk about today is Queen Isabella I of Castile. It is interesting to learn that she opposed slavery of indigenous people, considering that her and King Ferdinand II of Aragon funded the Columbus expeditions. But she believed that indigenous people should not be used as slaves, mainly because of reputation and religious reasons. She believed that the enslavement of indigenous people was wrong because they had souls that could be converted to Christianity. This supports the idea during this time that morally it was wrong to enslave a person who could be saved and converted to Christianity. She was also highly concerned with the reputation of Spain and did not want to make it seem like Spain's colonization was more brutal than the other countries. Queen Isabella I believed that enslaving indigenous people could cause conflict in the new colonies, which would undermine Spain. Queen Isabella I issued an official order to prohibit indigenous slavery in 1500, and with the help of King Ferdinand II, created the laws of the Indies to protect indigenous people from unfair treatment and slavery unless they were sentenced to slavery for a violent reason or if they were captured in war. Despite these efforts, a lot of colonists often disobeyed royal orders and continued to use indigenous people as slaves. The colonists often forced indigenous women into relationships, raped them, seized land, had captured indigenous people in raids, violently punished men, women, and children for any attempt to resist the Spanish control. Also, Queen Isabella I imposed systems like the encomenda system and the reparamiento system, which made it easier for Spanish colonists to abuse and violently hurt indigenous people. It's sad to think that her opposition of slavery isn't about how horrible it is, but because of her drive to spread Christianity and thrive economically off of the Spanish colonies. The second person I'm going to talk about is Bartolomé de las Casas, who was a priest, historian, and missionary. His main reasons for opposing both indigenous and African slavery was mostly due to religion, but also his understanding of natural rights. His views initially about slavery were no different from the norm, and he even owned his own encomenda system and African slaves. But after years of seeing the extreme violence and abuse against indigenous slaves, he actually recommended the use of African slaves, but later changed his views and became an advocate for both indigenous and African people. His new beliefs changed mainly because of his understanding of natural law and rights. He believed forced labor was a violation of natural rights because everyone, including indigenous and African people, had rights given by God. These rights were inherited by every human being, regardless of things like race, ethnicity, culture, or social status. He believed no one could take these away because they were ordained by God. Similar to Queen Isabella I, Bartolomé believed indigenous and African people could be converted to Christianity. Bartolomé advocated against African slavery, or African and indigenous slavery in several ways to attempt to stop all forms of it. He wrote a very influential book called A Short Account of the Destruction of the Indies that exposed the abuse of the indigenous people. He also influenced King Charles I of Spain to create the new laws of 1542 and appealed the Spanish crown several times. Bartolomé claimed to view African slavery the same as indigenous, but he didn't really do much to stop African slavery. His views about African slavery didn't change until the 1540s, and he never really focused on African slavery in his writings like he did with the indigenous people. Queen Isabella I and Bartolomé de las Casas were not the only people to advocate against slavery, but it seems like the opposition of slavery is very conditional, or was very conditional. It seems like Queen Isabella I only really cared about slavery because of her reputation, because she still continued to get rich off of it. And Bartolomé seemed not to care as much about African slavery as he did with indigenous slavery, which doesn't really make sense other than being racist, especially if the North Atlantic slave trade was just happening, and knowing how those poor people were treated and transported, Bartolomé could have definitely included African American slavery in more of his writings. Bartolomé also got rich off of mistreatment of both African indigenous people and slavery. Thank you guys for listening and have a great day.